Billy awoke to his alarm clock blaring, the digital display flashing 6:30 a.m. He had deliberately set the alarm sound to the most annoying option, so there would be no way he could sleep through it. He whacked it to shut it off with one hand, rubbing sleep from his eyes with the other. Groaning, he sat up in bed, still rubbing his bleary eyes, his fluffy blonde hair standing up from his head in tufts at every conceivable angle. There was only one thing that made him excited for the day ahead, and it sure as heck wasn't school. He swung his legs over the edge, bounced his ass on the bed twice, and used the momentum to spring himself up and into a deep, full-body, toe-tingling stretch, then bounded over to the aquarium in a couple long strides. On top of a large, flat rock protruding from the water that filled the bottom third of his aquarium, his pet Tangrils were still frozen in their sleeping positions, although, according to latest observations, it was not actually clear whether they slept at all. Anyway, they were standing on their thin, feathery tail fins, perfectly still, their beady, lidless black eyes open, their half-worm, half-fish bodies contorted in an odd tableau. Billy found them totally fascinating. His 4 Tangrils and the equipment to take care of them had cost him the wages of 5 whole weekends of mowing lawns, but for his money they were well worth it. As soon as he had first heard about them on the internet, he knew he had to get some for himself. As he stood over the aquarium, preparing to give them their morning meal, they began to stir. Their eyes, at first, seemed to follow him. Then they would move their weird, tube-shaped heads, flutter their tiny, vestigial pectoral fins, and finally move their bodies from their awkward and uncomfortable-looking sleeping positions. The first one, and also the largest, at a full 6 inches from the tip of its proboscis-like snout to its tail, which he had named Jack the Ripper, slid off the rock and into the water, followed by another, then the rest of them. From a little plastic enclosure beside the dresser, Billy produced 2 pinkies, the live baby mice that a Tangril care blog had recommended as an affordable option for feeding them. In the water at the bottom of the aquarium, all the Tangrils swam around eagerly, nearly pressing their faces against the glass, watching Billy with their blank, motionless, shiny black eyes as he carefully took the pinkies out of their enclosure. As he raised them up to drop them into the aquarium, the Tangrils swam upwards and thrashed their fins and tails about, jostling for position, their hungry, tube-like mouths sticking up out of the water. Billy dropped the first mouse from above the aquarium all the way down into the water, and a bloodbath ensued. The largest Tangril, Jack the Ripper, jostled itself into position to catch the pinky before it even hit the water, sealing its tube-sock jaw around the belly and sucking out the organs while the live baby mouse squirmed and struggled desperately. The other Tangrils were on it in a flash, all of them sealing their jaws onto whatever parts of the mouse they could get at, and ripping off chunks of living flesh. According to the Tangril owner's blog and forum, their mouth tubes created a powerful vacuum-like suction, and the entire tube was lined with hundreds of razor-sharp teeth capable of shredding flesh and bone alike. The feeding frenzy, Billy felt, was something he could never get tired of. At first the pinkies had grossed him out a bit, but after a few weeks he was used to it, and could now enjoy the entire process of watching his Tangrils feed. He waited until the mouse was gone before dropping the next one in, because he knew if, by some chance, the prey died before the Tangrils finished eating, they would lose interest in it immediately. They would only consume living flesh, just one of the many quirks of these unique and fascinating creatures. They had been discovered recently in an isolated lake in New Mexico, where a small population of a couple hundred of them were the only examples that had ever been found anywhere. They were previously totally unknown to biologists and to the fossil record, leaving scientists astonished that they had managed to go undiscovered for so long. Tangrils were usually 4 to 6 inches long, sand-colored, resembling a cross between leeches, shrimp without shells, and bottom-dwelling fish. They ate only fleshy organisms such as fish, mice, frogs, and lizards, but no bugs. Their behavior was also unique. They swam primarily in the shallow waters of the lake during the daytime, climbing out of the water at night to quote-unquote stand on rocks or logs on the shoreline in strange, dance-like poses, returning to the water in the morning to feed. The vast majority of the information about Tangrils on the internet was supplied by a blog and forum run by someone with the username Bottom Feeder, an armchair researcher of sorts who was a wealth of knowledge on every aspect of Tangril biology and care. Rumors circulated that he was the one who had brought the new species to the attention of biologists, but these were unsubstantiated. In any case, Bottom Feeder had progressed from observing, to owning, to breeding Tangrils in his house. This blog, and Bottom Feeder in particular, were responsible for starting a trend of owning Tangrils as niche exotic pets. That was how Billy had first heard of them, a video of a pack of Tangrils feeding on a large goldfish posted on the internet. Billy smiled vaguely as a recollection as he watched the bloody feast of his own Tangrils. Floating up from downstairs, his mother's raucous voice snapped him out of his reverie. "Billy, you'll be late for school. What are you, playing with those gross little fish things again?" He looked at his alarm clock with a sigh. She was right. He hadn't even showered or had breakfast yet. Reluctantly, he put the lid back on the mouse container, said goodbye to his Tangrils, and loped off towards the bathroom to get ready for school. Billy's adolescent life continued apace for the next couple weeks, keeping him busy with school, hockey, and video games when he had time off from the first two. He still enjoyed his Tangrils, though by now the novelty had worn off somewhat, and they were becoming just another fact of his life. His mother, on the other hand, still couldn't be in the room with them when they were feeding. Billy smirked about that. He liked to imagine bringing a girl from school over and showing them off, totally grossing her out. He would have to make sure to catch something bigger to feed them that day, so she could see what they were really capable of. He was sure that his mastery over the vicious little creatures would impress her. Only one small thing troubled Billy about them, and that was that, on Bottom Feeder's Tangril Owners Forum, several reports had emerged recently of owners suffering vicious bites from their Tangrils during feeding. One evening before bed, as he was reading the forum on the family laptop, pretending he needed it for homework, he read one particularly bad report of a swarming attack. This kid, a user on the forum, had apparently been feeding large bullfrogs to his Tangrils, which they loved, but there was one problem. Some of the bullfrogs were so big that they would die in the tank before the Tangrils finished eating them, after which, of course, the Tangrils would lose interest. One particularly big one managed to get stuck down in the bottom of the tank and die there, and its corpse went untouched for days until this kid figured he better take care of it. One evening, just after his Tangrils had climbed up onto their rock to assume their quote-unquote sleeping positions, he had reached his hand carefully and quietly into the tank to remove it. Just as he had wrapped his fingers around the bullfrog's slimy, rotting corpse, the Tangrils had become alerted to his presence in their territory. In a flash, all 6 of them were on the attack. Before he could even let go of the dead frog, they had surrounded his hand down in the bottom corner of their tank, latched their powerful sucking tube jaws onto him, and stripped the first 2 fingers of his hand nearly down to the bone. Even when he had screamed and yanked his hand out, a few of them had remained attached, and they had managed to chomp through a major artery in his wrist, all in the course of a split second, causing serious blood loss and a trip to the hospital. Billy winced as he looked at the photos the kid's mom had taken. They were truly gruesome. The kid said he would have to go back to the hospital a few more times for reconstructive surgeries on his hand. Billy shuddered to think what it must have felt like, to see and feel your own flesh being ripped away from you and devoured by your own pets. He glanced sidelong over the screen of the laptop towards the Tangrils in the aquarium on his dresser. It was getting late, and they had all climbed out of the water to stand on their rock, their strange little bodies contorted into the oddest poses. He looked back at the photos one more time. He would be more careful than that kid from the forum, that was for sure. He would make sure he never had to reach his whole hand into the water. Then he looked back at his own Tangrils. Their shiny, lidless black eyes seemed to stare back at him impassively. Over the next couple weeks, 2 more feeding incident reports appeared on the forum. They were not as bad as the one he had read about a couple weeks ago, but they still gave Billy pause the next time he went to feed his Tangrils. Funny, before he had gotten them, he remembered he had been eager to touch them, to see what their weird, ribbed, worm-like bodies felt like, to feel their tiny, bat-wing-like pectoral fins between his fingers. Now he was sure to keep his hands well clear of their tank whenever he was dropping prey in for them. Oddly enough, all of these reports quickly disappeared from the forum, as though deleted by moderation, and Billy was not the only one who noticed. Another user started a thread accusing Bottom Feeder of covering up the potential risks of Tangril ownership in order to sell more Tangrils. They were a new species, the user continued, and had only been kept as pets for a couple of months by now, so any and all information about them was valuable, and keeping anything from the public could lead to further incidents. For his part, Bottom Feeder insisted that he had never deleted the reports, and would never do such a thing. He apologized about the whole thing, reiterated that Tangrils were not to be touched or petted under any circumstances, and advised owners to wear thick gloves and use tongs or a scoop any time they had to reach into a Tangril aquarium. Gradually, the controversy settled down. In fact, Tangril challenge videos became a local trend on the internet, with teenagers making videos of themselves feeding large, ferocious, or armored creatures to their Tangrils to see who would win. Popular examples included crabs, piranhas, a snapping turtle, and even a big, hungry rat. None of them could hold up to the onslaught of a pack of voracious Tangrils for long. The deathmatch with the piranhas was an all-out war, but the Tangrils seemed capable of a level of cooperation and tactics that the piranhas were not. Even the armored shells of the crab and turtle were no match for the Tangrils, which attacked from the weak spots and eventually ripped their way through all defenses. Billy had his friend Josh come over and film him feeding a fully grown mouse to his Tangrils, but it wasn't as much of a challenge for them as some of the animals in the other videos, so it didn't get that many views. Days later, however, another incident occurred, which no moderation of the forum or deleting of reports could cover up. This one made the news. "Billy! Get in here!" his mom called from the living room, where she had plunked herself down in front of the TV after work. "They're talking about your little fish things on TV." Billy had a feeling this was going to be bad as soon as he heard the call from downstairs. He looked over at his Tangrils. They were swimming around, appearing to socialize with each other. He would have to feed them again this evening before bed. He got up and flew down the stairs and sat down beside his heavy old mom just as the story was breaking on the local news channel. Billy's gut feeling had been right. This was a bad one. The segment was presented with the title, "Internet Trend Turned Tragedy." It began with some basic background info on the newly discovered species, and how they had become an internet trend in the area in recent weeks. The report was mostly correct, but Billy bristled when the anchor referred to them as fish, which they were not. "They're actually not related to any other known species on Earth," Billy tried to explain to his mom. "Shut it and watch this," she answered, brushing off his attempt. The news reporter interviewed the mother and father of two high school girls in their home. The younger sister's kitten, the father said, had been watching the older sister's Tangrils ever since she had brought them home, and in the past had made several attempts at catching them. That day, the older sister had forgotten to put the lid back on the aquarium after feeding them before school. The father had come home that afternoon to find the kitten on the floor in the hallway, barely alive and badly mutilated, more than a third of the fur and flesh stripped away from its tiny body, its naked tendons and muscles still spasming without the cover of its devoured skin. Even some of the muscles had chunks missing from them. In the background, both girls cried and hugged each other as the father calmly delivered the interview. He had rushed the kitten to a veterinarian, he continued, but it had been too late. The poor thing was missing too much flesh. There was no saving it. They had been forced to put it down to end its suffering. "And that's why we brought this to your attention," the mother chimed in. "We got rid of them evil little things, and y'all watching this ought to as well. Nobody ought to keep them things as pets. They're just evil." The father confirmed that indeed he had been the one to take care of his daughter's Tangrils, holding up his bandaged left hand as proof. "Well, sure, I wore gloves, my leather welding ones, matter of fact, but one of the little bastards chewed right through it. I went at him with kitchen shears and a big knife, but they're tougher than you'd expect, and fast, too," he concluded, holding his bandaged left hand up to the camera again. The oldest daughter spoke a few words through choked-back sobs, telling the news anchor she felt so bad about poor Simba, and how the kitten's death was all her fault for leaving the cage open, before the girl's mother stepped in and comforted her. The news anchor then gave the mother the final word. "Our message today is simple. If you got Tangrils in your home, get rid of them. If your child wants to get some, Lord above knows why, tell him no. For Christ's sake, these things are wild animals. They absolutely do not belong in your home." The segment came to a close, and Billy's mother turned off the TV to punctuate that final remark. She turned to her son, her eyebrows raised. "Well?" she prompted. Billy swallowed down a lump in his throat. He had to admit to himself that bit about the kitten was upsetting. But he knew what his mom wanted, and he couldn't back down. He thought about the little predators in his aquarium upstairs. He didn't even have a lid on it at all. Then again, he didn't have any other pets to worry about. "Well," he began tentatively, "good thing we don't have a kitten, I guess." He knew how weak that sounded, and cringed at himself. "No," his mom shot. "Don't give me that. No. I want you to get rid of them." "But Mom, but nothing. I never did like those things." "I know, that's why you're using any excuse to make me get rid of them. But if you just use your head—" Ow! With speed that belied her heft, her broad hand flashed out and clubbed him over the ear. "Don't you backsass me like that!" Blinking back his impotent adolescent frustration, Billy tried to argue his case, albeit a little more civilly this time round. "But Mom, I can't just kill them. I took responsibility for them. I have to find them a good home." He couldn't bring himself to get rid of them immediately, and in reality he was only buying time. He had even named them. Well, he had named one anyway, and he didn't want to give them away. "Who in their right mind is going to want those nasty little things?" his mom asked, pulling an exaggerated face. "Someone will. Give me time to find someone to take them." "Fine, but I want them out of my house, pronto." She heaved herself up off the couch and plodded off to the kitchen, leaving Billy with his thoughts. The kitten incident sparked a new debate and controversy on the forum over the ethics and safety of Tangril ownership, and in particular whether a Tangril aquarium needed a lid. Bottom Feeder weighed in that he personally did not keep lids on any of his multiple tanks, because he had no other pets, but he did update his Tangril owner's guide to indicate that anyone with other pets or children in their home should keep a lid firmly secured on top of their aquarium. Billy, meanwhile, had not made any progress in finding someone to take his Tangrils. In fact, he had not even taken any steps to advertise that he was giving them away. But with every day that went by, his mum lost a little more patience, and started threatening to dump the whole tank down the sewer if he didn't hurry up. He toyed around with the idea of telling her he had to release them back into the wild, which would mean a road trip out to the original lake they had been discovered in, but he figured she would never go for that. That night, something strange indeed happened on Bottom Feeder's blog. He rescinded his post from earlier about putting a lid on the tank. In an oddly phrased post that was full of typos, he insisted that nobody put lids on their Tangrils, as it could, quote, interfere with natural Tangril behaviors, unquote, and that, quote, Tangril need total free movement, end quote. When users on the forum pressed him for clarification, he came online the next morning and insisted that he had never given those instructions, reiterated that putting a lid on your Tangrils could not possibly be harmful, and claimed that someone must have hacked his account to put out misinformation. As evidence of the hack, he cited the spelling mistakes and nonsensical instructions, and pointed out that the writing didn't even sound like him. Nevertheless, rumors and speculation abounded. New information about Bottom Feeder was made public, leaked from a source who claimed to know him personally and did not approve of his behavior. The source claimed that Bottom Feeder was in fact a 23-year-old student at the local university, pursuing a master's degree in marine biology. He had been responsible for kicking off the entire Tangril trend, and the whole blog and forum was really just a marketing website for his business, breeding and selling Tangrils out of his house to pay for school, much to his roommate's chagrin. The same source alleged that Bottom Feeder only cared about selling Tangrils and covering his own ass, not what people did with the creatures he was selling. More than a few users reported getting rid of their Tangrils, as the whole thing was sketchy. Even Billy was starting to come to the conclusion that he couldn't stall forever. His mum was pissed, and there was nothing but negative publicity around his choice of pet. He needed some good news. Unfortunately, none was forthcoming. The news that greeted Billy the next day was nothing short of horrific. This time, he didn't need his mum to call him to the TV to show him. It was all over the internet, and word spread around his school before he even got home. New Mexico horror, proclaimed the headlines. The naked skeleton of a 23-year-old man from the next big town over had been discovered on his bedroom floor, arms outstretched towards the door. All the flesh, veins, muscle, organ, and tissue of every sort had been stripped from his bones and devoured without a trace, except for the blood that had soaked into the carpet. The man's roommate was shaken when he discovered the remains. He was quick to say, "I told you so," in the interview, as he had never appreciated his house being used as a Tangril breeding aquarium, but the gruesome discovery was enough to rattle most anyone. Besides, he had to find a new place to live, as dozens, if not hundreds, of the Tangrils his roommate had been keeping were missing. They had apparently somehow escaped from their lidless tanks sometime in the night, made their way to the bed where he was sleeping in the same room, attacked him in a swarm large enough to kill and eat him, and then disappeared into the night. The surviving roommate had no idea if any of them were still in the house they had shared, or whether any had escaped into the wilderness, but he told reporters he was not trying to stick around to find out, you feel me? Billy felt sick. This was it. No arguing now. The Tangrils had to go. He didn't even want to keep them anymore. Matter of fact, he didn't even want to see them. Everyone was getting rid of theirs. Wildlife conservation groups were asking lawmakers to pass emergency legislation making it illegal to own, buy, sell, or breed Tangrils. Already, one local conservation group was setting up a collection program, offering a location for unwanted Tangrils to be dropped off and eventually released back into the lake, where they had originally been discovered. That was where he planned to go. He would borrow his mom's van when she got home from work and get rid of them. On the way home from school, he got off the bus a few stops early, near a local pet shop. He bought a lid that he was pretty sure would fit his aquarium, and then walked the rest of the way home. As soon as he got home, he donned his hockey gloves and went up to his room. As he moved toward the aquarium, lid in hands, his Tangrils grew restless. Did they know he was about to get rid of them? No, of course not. How could they know? Nevertheless, Billy moved quick, plunking the lid onto the tank, sealing it down with a couple taps of his gloved fist, and then backing away. The largest Tangril, the one he had named Jack the Ripper, climbed out of the water and up onto the rock. Standing on its tail fins, he looked up at the lid, studied it for a couple of seconds, and then turned his glossy black eyes to Billy. The dead, lidless gaze sent an icy chill from the nape of Billy's neck, down his spine, all the way into his balls. Even standing on the rock, Jack the Ripper was still a good foot away from the top of the tank. Besides, Billy assured himself, the lid was on. He noticed his hands were shaking. He tore his eyes away, threw a blanket over the cage so he and his Tangrils couldn't see each other, and breathed a sigh of relief. Whew! Now that it came down to it, he would be glad to be rid of them. He wrapped the blanket around the tank, and then secured it with hockey tape, just to be safe. After all those reports of attacks, injuries, the kitten, and now even Bottom Feeder, there was no way he was taking any chances. He thought about all the Tangrils that had escaped Bottom Feeder's house. God only knew where they had all gotten to. Billy tried to imagine what it would be like if Tangrils became endemic to the local ecosystem, what kind of havoc they would wreak. Hopefully, he thought, they were just hiding in the house and would dry up and die soon. Hopefully they hadn't got out into the neighborhood, into the local pond, or the little river that ran through that town and several others, that branched off into several forks and creeks, many of which ended up in their own lakes. Hopefully they would not be able to navigate the river system and get out into the ocean. Yeah, hopefully, Billy thought, and he shuddered.